But I think with human nutrition, it's the absolute inverse effect.
Nadia, how did you find Carnivore?
Well, they've actually had started with Banting. I don't know if you've heard of Banting. I live in South Africa, and we have a professor, Tim Noakes, who's at the sports science department at the University of Cape Town. And by 2010, he is a diabetic, and his father died from diabetes. So this was on the forefront of his mind. And he developed what he calls the real meal revolution. You can see. And he is committed to changing lives one meal at a time. And it's basically a low carb, high fat diet. And he was ridiculed in his community, as we understand. And he went ahead and did a little experiment anyway. And he managed to rustle up 127 guinea pigs, and they literally lost between them 1,900 kilograms, which is huge. And he decided, well, this is really working. So they got together with a couple of colleagues and they wrote these beautiful books. There's one for children too. It's called Raising Superheroes. And there's also one for diabetics. And I got the one for my brother, who was a diabetic, because I was absolutely shocked by what was being recommended to his diet. It's this, don't worry, eat whatever you want. Here's the pill, everything's good. And unfortunately, that didn't work out for him, because 18 months after he lost his leg due to diabetes, he had a pulmonary embolism and passed away at age 51. So that was my first wake-up call as to how important nutrition is and what we put into our bodies. Well, not really my first wake-up call, because I'm actually married to an animal nutritionist. And I always say to him, how is it that animal nutrition seems to be so much more advanced than human nutrition? And his response was, animals audit you. If you don't feed them the species-appropriate diet, they will not grow and thrive. And therefore, your profits will not be as high. But I think with human nutrition, it's the absolute inverse effect. The profits are higher when they keep you sick and unwell. And then if you need a pill to help you with anything, it's there to keep you chronically ill. So it's just a loop for me. And when I saw what was happening with my brother, I just knew we can't carry on like this. And by that time, I'd had my own children, and I raised them not on the rice cereals and the starches from the beginning, because literally it starts with your pregnancy, in fact, how you feed yourself. And that's really, really important. And I was raised, both my parents, my mother and father. My father is Italian, and he came out to South Africa when he was 10. But he believed in, if you eat well and your nutrition is good, then you won't need the doctor. So we were raised with that. And most people know Italian food to be only pizza and pasta. What they don't realize is that it's very vegetable heavy. And everybody in Italy who has a patch of land will grow their own food. It's really, really part of the culture. But so I grew up eating my vegetables. I love my vegetables. Never thought anything of it. Healthy child, moved on to college. Obviously, diet took a bit of a dive. But even then, as a student, I would make myself a leg of lamb and then portion it for the rest of the week. So I never ate unhealthily and always meat heavy. So that wasn't really a problem. Until I went on a tour that year, in my first year, we went to Noakes to go and see the flowers in the desert blooming. After a short spate of rain, usually around August, the desert just blossoms into this magnificent sea of flowers. And when I came back, I was suddenly incredibly ill. My muscles would go into spasms, was exhausted. So they had me tested, and they saw that my white blood cell count was off the charts, and they thought I might have leukemia. But thankfully, all it was a huge allergic reaction. Suddenly, I had this histamine response out of nowhere. and it was triggered obviously by all the pollen. So they tested me, and I was suddenly allergic to just about everything. And so for once a week, every Friday, I remember having to go for these injections to desensitize me. So they'd inject me just under the skin on my forearm, and it would swell up like a tennis ball. And that was to try and desensitize me to everything. So clearly I had some kind of histamine response. Carried on, normal life, and had my children. And while I was feeding my children, this is the funniest thing, they were healthy, they slept well, didn't have any problems. Now that they're teenagers and I have one at varsity and they're feeding themselves all sorts of processed foods, yeah, their health has definitely taken a dive. So I know that nutrition is definitely key to all of this. But then going through this process, I realized too that it's such an individual journey. Just as your fingerprints are individual, so too is your whole body. And it's a complex system. I think we tend to forget that it's just not a one-size-fits-all story. We really need to understand ourselves. And doesn't matter how many degrees you have or if you're a doctor or professor, at the end of the day, nobody can tell you how you feel when you eat something or ingest something and how it affects your body. So I really think we need to become radically self-responsible for our own health, because if the last 4 years have taught us anything, it's that there's nobody else who has a vested interest in your health. In fact, they would rather profit from your dis-ease. So 2 years ago, my mom developed dementia. Well, I think it was the trauma from losing my brother. It was their only son, my only sibling. And I don't think she ever recovered from that. And her health definitely just declined from there on in. She was a smoker most of her life. She had vascular disease. So there were other complicating factors. But we eventually moved her down to Hillcrest, where we live, to a care home. And she had a fall in January 2023. On the 10th of January, she had a fall. And the next day she was hospitalized. And she was in hospital for 4 months. And hospitals, as we know, are not the best places for healing. And in those 4 months, she developed gangrene. And they offered her an amputation to save her life, and she refused. At age 85, I'm sure that's not really something anybody wants to go through. And I think because of my brother and seeing him suffer with his amputation, she was not prepared to go on that journey. So needless to say, unfortunately, a slow and painful death, and she eventually died on the 8th of September, 2023. And I watched her suffer, I watched her lose her mobility, and that really jolted me even more to looking at what I need to do in my life. But what had happened, 3 days after my mom was hospitalized, I developed shingles of my inner ear and trigeminal nerve. It's called Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. Never experienced pain like that in my entire life. It was something else actually. And I was trying to deal with the stress of going to hospital on a daily basis, trying to run a home, take my son to school, back and forth, do everything because I do my own housework. So running a household and trying to keep everything together with having something that is actually so painful to deal with was really, really taxing, and it took a lot out of me. And the problem with shingles is that after the pain or the initial virus leaves your body, you can have nerve damage, which is what I do have. And it can take anything from, the speculation is 2 to 5 years for some people for your nerves to heal properly. So I had to do something radical, and that's how most people find carnivore. So from going from a low carb, high fat diet anyway, where I'd cut out most of everything, I started seeing all these carnivore videos popping up and decided, well, when you're desperate enough, you do desperate things. And everybody told me, oh, well, everybody, not many people know. My husband wasn't convinced. I don't think he still is. And my children also think that I'm going to die without fiber. So we'll just have to see. So I started Carnivore, and it was really going so well. And 2 weeks in, I hit a brick wall of notes. I woke up one morning and I could hardly move. Everything hurt. My eyes were welded shut just about. And my joints hurt. I had a headache. It was just, I was just like, I can't believe it. I'm supposed to be feeling so fantastic. Why are all these people lying about Carnivore? It looks so wonderful. And then, thankfully, Sally K. Norton arrived in my life, and I learned about oxalates and oxalate dumping. And definitely, that was one of the things. And I tend to, it seems, my skin had improved so much on Carnivore. And yet, when I put my fingers over my forehead, it felt like sandpaper. And I was getting these crystals coming out of my eyes, and I was just like, what on earth? And so eventually I learned a lot about oxalates. I've been going down a lot of rabbit holes and learning more and more about myself. And but there was something else that was also not working. And another rabbit hole later, if you look at MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, which is all about histamines and how people respond to histamines. So that's why I realize it's really so critical for us to understand our individual bodies, because everybody's different. So high histamine foods could be mature cheeses or aged meats. And I think Michaela Peterson is one of those people. She can't tolerate those aged meats, so needs to eat fresh steaks. And also depending whether it's minced, there's more likelihood of bacterial growth on minced food or leftover food. So you have to just work with that and see how that works for you. So again, this whole fingerprint story, we need to just not put all our trust into authority and to people who, just because you have a white coat and a stethoscope doesn't give you the right to tell me how I'm supposed to react. So I do obviously tend to seem to have a healthy disrespect for anybody telling me what to do. But I think it's important that we take that power back, because we've just handed it over to people who we can't trust. And I had a serious trust issue in my life. And the one thing it does do, the only positive thing that you can take from that, is that it teaches you to trust yourself. And I think that's what's been taken away from us. We need to trust ourselves and our bodies and our healing capabilities. So that, for me, has become critical. And I learned with my mom too, the only positive that I could ever take from having shingles was that it suddenly made me understand how my mother suffered. My mother had neuropathy, and I could never really understand how she would just burst out in pain and she would cry out, and and when you have nerves firing and just suddenly doing things that you're not aware of, it gave me such compassion and understanding. So even the negatives you can take and find positives in them, and everything is here to teach you something. So that's how we learn. And it affects not only our health. I discovered early on when my children, well, before my children were born, I was a textile designer originally, and I was doing research for a botanical design for a client. And I was in a library, and I took out this huge botany book, and this little tiny book dropped off the back of it and fell on my foot. And I thought, gee, that's odd. And it was actually Maria Montessori's The Secret of Childhood. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And literally 6 months later, I had moved and was studying Montessori education before I even had children. And that in itself was a blessing in disguise, because much like our food system, our health system, our education system, unfortunately, we've been propagandized off the planet just about. And Montessori is almost like the human diet and what we're supposed to eat. Montessori is that for education, on how children are actually supposed to learn. And if they learn in that fashion and learn to become critical thinkers, and Mussolini, the first thing he did was shut down the Montessori schools, because you can't control free thinking individuals. And Montessori does that. So you need critical thinkers, and you need people to be thinking for themselves and to actually fulfill their unique potential, because we're all here to offer those gifts. And so much like everything, I think about it, since the 1800s, we've been lied to just about everything. All our systems are broken, and we really, really need to look at that. And if they can do it with the fundamentals like food, what else are they doing? So I think we really need to sit up and take notice of that. And so that's how I basically came to Carnivore. And it's a process. My ode to oxalates now is having a cup of Earl Grey tea with my breakfast, because learning that you can't just go cold turkey. Well, I couldn't, definitely. I had a huge reaction. And you just have to take it one day at a time and see what works for you. It's really that simple. It's got to get back to basics. And the nice thing about Carnivore is that it eliminates most of everything. Then you can see how you respond, what you need in your body. And even exercise, for example. I've never been a runner. I always joke that I'll run if a lion chases me. That's about as good as it's going to get. But so different times in your life, anybody over 40, especially women, your exercise needs to change, because if you go mad cardio, your hormones are just going to suffer. And so we need to learn different stages of our lives, different phases, what is actually appropriate at that particular point in time. We can't just have this one size fits all cookie cutter, which they've tried to do to us. And I noticed with my children were thriving in Montessori schools, but problems started the minute we put them into mainstream schools. My firstborn was in a school for 6 months, and I got called in to say he's completely disruptive, and they were 5 seconds short of telling me he needed medication because he was being disruptive. And when I said, well, it sounds like he's just bored, we need to maybe extend him, they were like, no, but everybody needs to be the same. And that's when I realized we can't do that. We can't all fit into the little neat box, but obviously it's more convenient when everybody's in a little box to control them. So, that's just how the cookie crumbles, as it is. And so that's basically the story.
Yeah. And that story you just told about, your son and going to, a non-Montessori school, and them kind of wanting him to comply. I mean, that's basically analogous to everything these days. It's health, food, everything, right?
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important that we learn to trust ourselves and what's good for us, and how, we assimilate information, how we learn, how we do everything. I think it's really so critical. And I can't tell you how grateful I am to have had that. So a simple thing, when I did Montessori, there's a book called Montessori from the Start, where you literally, because movement is so critical for neural development and brain development, you do not confine children to cribs in Montessori. They are given a huge space, double bed, futon mattress, in fact, on the floor, so that they can move from the very beginning. because without movement, you don't grow myelin. Without myelin, you don't have neural connections or proper neural connections. So movement is critical. And so not only did Montessori teach me those basics, but also how children are just so amazing at just learning naturally. And the system actually just takes that away from them and beats them down. And I didn't sign up for that, really. I think we came here to express our unique abilities and gifts, and we really have been, beaten down is the only word I can use. And I think we need to just rise up again. And I feel that starting with the basics, like just nutrition, will make people realize and understand that we can change everything, and we need to, because the world needs us to be our best and our best potential that we can reach, that we weren't meant to be. I don't even know how to express that, but it's almost like our humanity is being taken away from us. And I want to stay 100% human, although my son is very keen to have a chip in his brain.
So on Carnivore, since you got started with it, how have you been eating day to day?
So since I learned about oxalates and definitely the MCAS, I'm mostly meat-based. So I have the cup of Earl Grey tea to bring back some oxalates. I find I love cheese, but certain cheeses, obviously, if they're more mature, affect me more. Fortunately, I don't seem to have a reaction to eggs, because that would be disastrous. I love eggs. Do a lot of eggs. I've become the steak queen. I cook all the steaks now. And I do in the mornings, it all depends. So I'll have maybe some hamburger patties with some eggs, or some hamburger patties with bacon. Love my bacon. Scrambled eggs with bacon lardons, crispy. So I'm finding, I grew up in a half Italian household, but my mom loved to cook and was a really great cook. So I miss. I don't eat for entertainment necessarily, but for me, eating was a very nurturing family experience. We spent a lot of time around the table. So I think and the textures, I think my dream job was to be an international food critic. Before Anthony Bourdain was even a thing, that's what I wanted to do, travel the world and just eat. So I miss the textures, the crunch especially. I need the texture. But I must admit that so many things, I don't have allergic reactions as much as I used to. So I don't suffer from that postnasal drip or any of that rhinitis that I normally suffered from. The only thing I haven't had a lot of success with is sleep, but I haven't really slept properly for 20 years since I've had my children. So I'm working on that. And I actually think I might have found a remedy for my sleep. So growing up, we always, as I said, ate well. And there was always, my mom always made bone broth. So whenever anybody was sick, bone broth. And so I carried on that tradition. If anybody is ever sick in our household, that's the first thing I do. Out comes the bone broth, and we all have chicken soup, and everybody gets a dose of that. So food as medicine is definitely something that I definitely look towards using. But now my attitude is plants are definitely medicinal. So I use plants not as nutrition so much anymore, but medicinally. So, a little bit of kimchi, we make our own kimchi.
So just to clarify, that means you're pretty much doing OMAD on a day-to-day basis?
So it depends on my day. I usually will have breakfast around about 4 or 5 hours after I've woken up. So, usually around about 10, 10:30, 11, depending, I'll have a breakfast. And then around about 4, 5 in the afternoon, I usually am a bit peckish, but I try and wait. My son comes back from school and his sporting activities. Then we normally have dinner around about 6, 7 o'clock at night. But I'm finding on weekends we're a bit more flexible. And then we normally have a late lunch, early supper, around about 5 o'clock. And then by 8 o'clock, I'm feeling a little peckish. So I've decided one day, I thought, okay, well, I'm not really hungry. I don't really want to eat. And I thought, okay, well, I'll take a cup of bone broth and I'll put a tablespoon of butter into that. And that was the first night I slept for 7 solid hours in a row. So I think that is my new sleeping tablet, is my cup of bone broth with butter in the evenings. That works really, really well. So basically 2 meals a day. And so I've been eating the low carb, high fat diet for a good 5, 6 years now, or going carnivore. But the carnivore is to try and heal the nerves because of the inflamed condition. It's highly anti-inflammatory, a carnivore diet. So that's been hugely helpful in those. It hasn't gone away yet. I'm still going through it. I've been seeing an integrative doctor, and we've been doing IVs of B vitamins and L-lysine and all of those things that help for shingles. And one thing that did happen, though, is I got a high dose of vitamin C in one of the IVs, and that triggered more oxalate dumping. So going back to Sally K. Norton, anything over 500 milligrams of vitamin C a day for people who have got high oxalates, it can actually cause dumping. So as I say, every day is a school day. I'm learning something new every day. And you just have to listen to your body at the end of the day. And, as I said, this MCAS has really been another eye-opener for me. So another rabbit hole, so more learning to do. And, it's amazing that at 55, I'm only starting to learn about myself now. So it's actually crazy because I don't think we ever taught really. And I think that's the thing that scares most people about children or having children, is that they don't come with a manual, but you need to be your own manual. And you need to learn every day.
So I know this is a work in progress, but do you feel that things are improving?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. As I said, a whole lot of things have already started improving. So the other interesting thing that you always ask, Dave, is how's your oral health? And one of the things I learned from Sally K. Norton, and I've noticed it on my own teeth, is you will get that buildup on your teeth. And that is slowly going away. I can literally watch it. So the more oxalates you dump, the more you'll get that on your teeth. So that for me is a measure of how much oxalates I'm circulating or how much is still left. So I'm really, and again, it comes back to if you're in a really great deal of pain, you sit up and take notice. So I'm not going to be stopping oxalates again completely for a while until I work it out of my system. And the interesting thing a comment she made on one of the other channels was that she's known carnivores who've been carnivore for 6 years, and only after 6 years do they start dumping oxalates. So it's not you don't know when it's going to hit you, but if you have the information, at least you can say, oh, it might be oxalate dumping. Maybe we should sit up and take notice. So unfortunately, we live in an age where we do have access to information, and I think that's why your channel is so important, because it's real people living real lives, dealing with real issues. And if that can spark something in anybody else, or make people say, oh, maybe I haven't thought of that. Let's take a look at that. And that's why I think it's so valuable, the work that you're doing. And really, thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you. So what advice would you give someone who's getting started with carnivore?
Okay, so you need to really just be very cognizant of the fact that you are completely unique. You can listen. There are so many channels out there to listen to. You can really do your due diligence. This is your body. But I wouldn't, I mean, I was low carb, high fat now for many years. I was not expecting the oxalate dumping. I really didn't know about oxalates. So, but thankfully there is so much information, and it's almost as if the floodgates have opened, and there's just so much information out there at the moment, and that's been really, really helpful. So do your research, but I would not do it cold turkey like I did it. That really was, again, you just really feel so bad, and you can't describe it to anybody. And so little by little, and I think, if you just honestly just take out the really, really processed foods out of your diet, if you are having those, that's already a big start, because those are highly inflammatory to our systems. And then, one by one, and in fact, I would say just add more meat. For every 2 vegetables you take away, add some more meat. And if anybody had told me 2 years ago that I would not be eating vegetables, I would just tell them, you're absolutely crazy. I love vegetables, but I must admit, ever since stopping vegetables, life has improved.
Nice. So do you have any way of people reaching out to you? Do you have a social media or anything?
My email address that you have can be used. I do have a disused Facebook account, but it hardly ever gets used because, we won't go down that rabbit hole. But that is basically it. I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to technology. So that's most probably the easiest way to reach me, if anybody does.
Sure.
I'm happy to share my journey. And one thing I have always been accused of in life is being a total idealist. And well, be that as it may, I honestly do believe that carnivore is going to be a catalyst. I don't know if you're aware of what happened when they reintroduced wolves to the Yellowstone National Park. Do you know that story?
No, I
So
don't.
this is for me is like an analogy of our world over the last 100 years. So the last wolves were removed from Yellowstone in 1926, and then for 70 years there were no wolves. And what happened was literally the entire ecosystem changed because there were no predators anymore. The elk, obviously, their population grew beyond, and they started actually damaging the environment, and they literally changed how rivers, because they are grazers and browsers, they damaged the trees, they damaged the grass, and because they weren't being hunted and chased from different areas, they started damaging the riverbanks, and that led to a decline in the beavers building dams because there were no trees anymore, and it just was a cascade of events that took place. And then in 1995, they reintroduced grey wolves to Yellowstone. And almost immediately, because they were being hunted now, they couldn't just stay in certain areas and overgraze and do the damage. And literally, they call it a trophic cascade. where everything started returning. The beavers came back, the birds came back because there were trees, and the riverbanks actually changed. So just bringing back carnivores, and so this is where my analogy fits in here, coming back to our natural human state and our natural human diet is going to have a cascade on everything. And we will suddenly, I think, and that carnivore calm that everybody talks about. I mean, I used to, because I think obviously I had nervous system dysregulation. And maybe partly my half Italian blood, but I could have a meltdown quite easily and be quite passionate. So that carnivore calm is definitely one of my biggest takeaways. And it's just, I think if we can all get out of that cloud of carbohydrates and just be calm and peaceful and be the custodians of this earth that we actually need to be, and what I think was intended. And, you know, monocultures have done more damage to our system than I think as we understand. And I watched a lot of Zach Bush and the regeneration of the soil and the gut microbiome and how the soil microbiome is so important. So we need to bring that back, and the carnivores are going to do that. We are going to be the people, because of the demand, we are going to go back to that regenerative farming that is so critical, and we can literally change the planet. So I'm quite hopeful about that.
Well, I'll link to your email below, Nadia. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it. You have been absolutely a colossal influence on the carnivore community, and please continue doing what you're doing.